Hi guys! So today we're going to be picking up on chapter 19. So what happened the last time? Let's see. So Jack and Early just had their boat taken away. So they're continuing their journey on foot. The last thing we read is Jack's kind of laying there wondering, why am I doing this? Why am I following this guy on this crazy journey? And then Early says, the numbers are running out. So we can kind of see this whole time their story has been connecting with Pie's story. And so what does it mean that the numbers are running out? Chapter 19. We didn't say much to each other the next morning as we packed our things. It was Tuesday morning. We'd been gone 2 days and Early showed no signs of turning back. I kicked some dirt over the campfire and we started out. Just a little ways from our camp, I noticed a pile of cracked walnut shells on the ground. Looking up, I studied a tall oak tree that might have been home to a hungry squirrel who'd been spying on us during the night. That was probably it. Still, I couldn't help feeling that someone else had been watching us. And let's make a prediction here, because we learned about someone in the last chapter that Early told us about. Do you remember? He said that there was a logger who'd gotten lost on the trail a couple years ago. So I'm wondering if maybe he has something to do with those cracked shells on the ground. The sky was cloudy and gray, and a soft mist surrounded us. We knew we'd have to venture farther north into the woods to actually be on the Appalachian Trail, and from what I've heard, it wasn't easy to find. I'd read that trees on the trail were marked with an occasional white swatch of paint, and that there were supposed to be warming huts and campsites for hikers. So far, we hadn't seen anything like that. Just lots of wilderness with an emphasis on the wilder. In fact, we'd wildered around so much, I'd have sworn we were lost. Since Olson had pilfered Early's compass, we were relying on our wits, and mine were getting dimmer by the minute. But Early still seemed to have his bearings. He had a map, but never checked it. I didn't know how he even knew which way was north, since the clouds were thick and dark. A storm was brewing. I was just getting ready to dig in my heels. We were heading back, and if Early didn't want to go, then I'd head back without him. I hoped he wouldn't call my bluff, though, because I didn't know how I would find my way. I squared my shoulders, turned to face Early, even held up my hand to tell him to stop. Then we heard the dogs. They were a fair distance behind us, but we heard them, barking and bellowing after whatever they were tracking. I couldn't be positive they were after us, but even Early sensed the need to pick up our pace. We veered to the right, and the barking followed us. Early, I think those dogs are following our scent. Why would they do that? We don't have any food left except the jelly beans. Maybe they're not looking for food. Maybe they're looking for us. Maybe they're looking for the bear. Could be, I said. Early had made it clear that we were looking for the great Appalachian bear. Maybe McScott wanted to make sure we didn't find it before him. Still, I couldn't help thinking there was more to it than that. The barking was getting louder. Either way, don't you think we'd better cross the river? There's no bridge. We'll get wet. I don't want to get wet, said Early. But if we cross the river, the dogs will lose our scent. Then we can find the bear first. I didn't really care who found the bear first, and I didn't know what Early had planned to do if he did find it. But this seemed to be enough to get Early moving. Okay, but where can we cross? The river is moving fast. Could be dangerous. Dangerous? I repeated. That's a funny word coming from someone who didn't think twice about heading off into the woods in search of a 700-pound bear. Come on, it looks like the river narrows a bit up here, and there are some logs jammed out towards the rocks in the middle. Maybe we can work our way across there. I could tell Early didn't want to give in. But the dogs were getting louder, their bellowing and high-pitched yelping competing with the roaring of the river. Early, I shouted, we need to cross. Let's find a bridge. I don't want to get wet. Just then, the dark clouds let loose, and what had been a fine mist turned into a downpour. There, I said, you're already wet. Now can we cross? Early tried to blink the raindrops out of his eyes. We can cross. As I looked at the swiftly moving current, and how it glossed over the wet logs jammed haphazardly against each other and a few large rocks, I realized that getting early on board would be the easiest part of crossing the river. I knew I should go first, since it was my idea, but my hand was itching to do rock, paper, scissors. Then Early saved me the embarrassment. "I'll go first," he said, and stepped out onto the closest log. For someone who was not very athletic, Early was surprisingly nimble and sure-footed. After a time watching him, I realized I shouldn't have been surprised at all. He was very sure about most things, whether they were true or not. He was sure that the number pi held within it a great story, that contrary to the theory of a renowned mathematician, the number pi and the story it told would never end, that his brother, who had been killed in the war, was still alive, and that a great bear would lead us to him, and that I was a person he wanted to be friends with. With that in mind, I again put one foot in front of the other as I followed Early Auden. He was halfway across by the time I got started. The logs seemed firmly jammed against one another, and I worked at keeping my eyes straight ahead. My feet kept slipping on the wet bark of the logs. I extended my arms to keep my balance, but my backpack shifted left and right, nearly pulling me into the rushing water. Early reached the boulder in the middle of the river, which seemed to be the reason for the tie-up of logs. He turned around and motioned to me to keep going before he continued on. I figured it was late in the logging season, otherwise the entire width of the river would have been congested with logs. These must have been the last few stragglers that had gotten snagged against each other. My heart was racing as I neared the boulder marking the halfway point. I stepped onto the rock. I made it! Halfway, at least. Here I was, standing on a wet rock in the middle of a swiftly moving river. I can do this, I thought. Then I made a big mistake. I looked around and saw that I was standing on a wet rock in the middle of a swiftly moving river. Suddenly, I was back on Dinosaur Log, frozen with fear. "Come on, Jackie," Early said, almost to shore, turned around, urging me to follow. I looked behind me, wondering if it would be better to go back in the direction I'd come from, but the first of the hound dogs had already arrived and was yapping and snarling. The dog whined and panted, dipping his paws into the water, only to back up and start howling again. Even he knew better than to take on the powerful river. I turned to face Early and carefully stepped out onto the next log. It was slimy with moss, but I mustered another couple of steps. Then my foot slipped, getting wedged between two logs. I cried out in pain as the rough bark tore at the skin on my ankle. The log shifted slightly, clamping my foot in a painful vise. I tugged and pulled, but it couldn't budge. "I'm stuck," I called out. Early began retracing his steps, heading back toward me. I used my free foot to stomp on one of the logs, and it moved. I was almost free. Just one more shove and... The logs gave way, freed from their jam. The world slid out from under me, and I was swept away. The next minutes, or years, I'm not sure which, were a blur of icy water and logs, bumps and gashes, and short gasps of air. I tried to grab hold of a log, but every time I grasped at it, the log would bob and roll away, as if this were some kind of game. The current was strong and my body grew cold and weak. It was a game I wasn't going to win. I tried to stretch out my body and float as best as I could. Maybe I could get one more bit of air. A log was rushing straight at me. It struck me. I felt a sharp pain in my forehead. Then I saw something and knew I must be slipping into unconsciousness. At first, I could only see its color and great size as it floated alongside me, just as in the story of Pi. Then I tried to take another breath, as my lungs took in more water than air, I looked into its eyes, the deep, somber eyes of a big white whale. All right, that was a pretty good chapter. So I want you to make a prediction in your head of what you think is going to happen, and we will find out next time.